Critical Analysis. This is your video for Chapter 2, which means we're already in week 4 of the semester, so we're making nice progress. And just to kind of preface the video, as I was preparing the lesson for this week, I realized that my video was going to be really lengthy from chapters 2 through 10. So what I decided to do is for every chapter, I'm going to try 2 videos. A video that covers the content of the chapter and like the text sheet and homework, and then a video that goes over the vocabulary. That way they're separate and you can access one without having to kind of fast forward or go through another, and we'll see how it works, and let me know your feedback. Let me know if you think that works or not. So okay, so let's get in. We're going to be in, as I said, week 4, chapter 2. So we're already in our second chapter of our textbook, and this one really starts to dig in a little bit more to kind of what the rest of the textbooks will look like. Chapter 1 was really like an intro, getting your feet wet, so to speak. So in chapter 2, you'll see in the materials folder, we have our PowerPoint, which I will have up and go through. And then in the vocabulary video, I will pull that up separately and walk you through the vocabulary that you'll see in this chapter. So for now, we are just going to use our PowerPoint, which will open up than mine just did. And I will be using that here in just a few moments to lecture. And in the assignment folder, what we'll be using in this particular video is eventually we will talk about this text and skill practice. So I have that downloaded and ready. You have a chapter 2 practice sheet homework. I have that downloaded and ready. And then we'll talk about your discussion board. So I know some of you might be thinking, wow, this is a lot in every week. But to be very honest, if we were meeting face-to-face, we would be doing even more. We would be doing group work, we would be doing practice exercises, we would be reading aloud, reading silently. So there's quite a lot that we do in our 4 hours. I typically teach this class, 2 days a week for 2 hours each. So that's why you might feel like there's a lot going on, because even though this is online, the rigor is still there. We're still doing all of the work. We're still getting all of the assignments done. And actually some stuff is cut out for the online format. So there's a little bit of adjustment for that purpose. All right. So as a reminder, your textbook is under the Start Here link. We'll scroll down a little bit. And there it is. Read to Succeed eText. Mine is up back here, and we are going to be, as I said a couple times now, chapter 2. And this is, I'll go back up to the beginning of it. This is in the content area of education. And so what I like about this chapter in terms of the fact that it's revolving around education is that it, first, a lot of people at Sarksay College do come here to be education majors. They want to teach in the preschool. They want to work on this and then grab, hold of a bachelor's degree afterward. Or secondly, the other reason I really like this is because even if you're not an education major, we've all experienced school. Some of us a lot differently the past year because of COVID, but we've all sat in a classroom at some point in our lives, whether it's just been elementary, middle, high school, we've been in a college classroom already. So we can even understand it from that perspective, even if this is not our particular content area or our interest. So American education in particular is what this is over, and you can see the learning objectives have to do with, we're going to be talking about issues in American education, and the reading focus, the reading skill is determining meaning from context. And so what I would recommend that you do is when you have your textbook up, pulled up, is kind of read the introduction to the discipline of education. It's a nice intro to what you're going to be reading about throughout this chapter. Remember, every chapter is juxtaposed. We have a reading skill and we have a content area. Our content area in chapter 2 is education. Our reading skill is determining meaning from context. But this will introduce you to the kinds of concepts that our readings will focus on. And to navigate, you can keep pushing down on the arrow buttons down there, or you can navigate along the side, whatever is easiest for you. But here are just some kind of preview questions, and you'll probably start to recognize these because your discussion board questions, which I'm going to flip back over to in a minute, I pull from here. So because these are questions I would typically ask you if we were sitting in a classroom together. I would not go through all of them, but I would pull a couple of them, get your input, and see what you think about these. And so to kind of compensate for that and not being able to do that face to face, I pull from those for your discussion post. So if you go down to, let me get back in again, I apologize. There's always a lot of clicking around when I do my videos because there's so much going on. In the assignment folder, here is your post. It says, when you hear that someone is educated, what image comes to your mind about this person? In your opinion, what are some of the characteristics of an educated person? So I pulled that again from right here. So that way every week we have some sort of discussion, kind of like I would do in a classroom, and that's where your discussion posts come from here on out, is right in the textbook. So the post is, when you hear, or see or think of someone who is educated, what does that mean? Does that mean they have degrees? Does that mean they know or do certain things? What does that mean to you? And what are some characteristics of an educated person? And I want to kind of challenge you to broaden your horizons on what you might think educated means. And that's the whole purpose of this. So that is the discussion board post for this week. And so again, since we are in week 4, this is running from February 8th through the 14th. Your discussion post for week 4 attendance is due on Wednesday the 10th. So make sure you post that by Wednesday the 10th for your points for this week for discussion attendance reasons. All right. So that's where kind of the beginning, this kind of gets you in the mindset. And then from there are some kind of getting warmed up. I always chuckle at this one. I think maybe because I have kids now and this kind of fits with them, because when I was in school, we didn't have smart boards in the classrooms. That was something that came toward the very end of my education. So there's a teacher here and little kid with a piece of chalk and clearly a chalkboard, and the child saying there aren't any icons to click. It's a chalkboard. The teacher's trying to explain to him that, he's very puzzled. He cannot figure it out. And so this cartoon kind of represents another issue in education revolving around like technology and how things are evolving. And even though things are evolving, is that holding us back in some capacities? So that opens up for some kind of contemplation and reflection as well. Okay, so that is like the content area. All of the readings you're going to do in this chapter will all have something to do with the field of education. So before we get back into the book, I do want to use my PowerPoint to start going through and talking about the reading skill, which I mentioned is determining meaning from context. So again, we're going to talk about education. There's the topics of what you're going to read about in the actual textbook for this chapter, but we're going to get to, it talks a little bit about part of speech. I don't spend a lot of time on this, honestly, because sometimes students find this to be confusing. It doesn't help them all the time to know, okay, this is a verb, therefore this helps me understand the meaning. I'm not saying it's not helpful. It's just most students have told me it confuses them more than helpful. They want to know what the word means first, and then they figure out the part of speech later. So that it does have some mention of parts of speech, knowing, is it a verb, is it an adverb, is it an adjective, a noun. So that's what they mean by part of speech there. But I don't spend tons of time on it. So part of knowing about vocabulary and context is knowing the difference between denotative and connotative meanings. So if someone says, what is the denotative meaning of this word? What does this denote? Denotative literally just means like the dictionary. What does the dictionary say about this word? If I were to look it up in the dictionary, how would they define this particular word? That is denotation or denote. Versus connotation. Connotation is like the feeling that comes with a word in context. Normally, it's either a positive or a negative connotation. So, for instance, there's an example in the next slide, but I always like to use the example of athlete and jock, because denotatively, they both have very similar dictionary definitions. If you were to look up like athlete and jock, they would both have something to do with, sporting, physical activity, something along those lines. However, someone may think of an athlete in a more positive way and a jock in a more negative way. Maybe jock comes to mind like, oh, this jerk in high school, or maybe very not not a very intelligent person. So that's what we mean by connotated. Connotated meanings sometimes project the positive or negative feelings, and that can help you understand how a word is being used in a selection as well. Here's another example. The student begged for an opportunity to retest. The student requested an opportunity. Again, very similar in denotative meanings, but connotatively, the word request has a little bit more respect to it, right, than maybe if they were begging. So connotation and denotation are things to kind of just be aware of. All right. Now, when you come across a word in a selection, hopefully you spend some time with it. I do have students who will admit that if they come across a word they're not familiar with, they skip it. And I can't say that I'm not guilty of that either. I've done that before. However, it comes back to bite me if that word appears more than once, or it turns out that the word was actually pretty pivotal in understanding. And so this chapter is talking about, hey, whenever you come across a word you may not be familiar with, yes, we have resources like dictionary.com or actual hard copy dictionary or those kind of tools we can use. But the first thing you should do when you come across a word you're not familiar with the meaning is to use context, to be able to use those surrounding word or words to help you understand the meaning of the unknown. So when we say context clues are literally hints or tips that allow you, the reader, to understand what the author means by a particular word. Not every author will give you clues, because if you're an advanced reader in an advanced class, they assume that you know most of the vocabulary. So authors will often give you these context clues if they know their audience is maybe new to a subject, or if it's a beginner level text, those kind of things. So what do I mean by context clues? What does that look like? That's what this is all about, leads. These are the different kinds of context clues. Authors can kind of give you logic, examples, antonyms, definitions, and synonyms. So we're going to look at each of these kind of a little bit more in depth. So when we say synonym, hopefully you know, means a word that's the same or nearly the same, pretty close. So if we had this, the cliff was stratified and each layer held several types of colorful rock. If I've never heard of the word stratified before, a couple words later, the word layer is there, which is a synonym of stratified. So that's how a context clue in a synonym form can help me figure out what the unfamiliar word might be. An author can also use just meanings, the definitions. I always say that my English language learners, where English is their second, third, fourth language, they tend to pick up on this stuff almost a little easier than native English speakers, because we tend, and when I say we, like native English speakers, and this is kind of a pattern I've noticed over the years, we tend to ignore punctuation quite frequently. Most of the time when it's written, we breeze past a comma, we skip over information in parentheses. Well, sometimes authors are giving clues when they do that. They are, especially if there's an unfamiliar word, they are working to give you the information you need, and unless we pay attention to it, we're not going to pick up on it. So an author can either give you a synonym, or the second one is they're just going to come right out and tell you what the definition is. So they might have a word like pulmonary circuit. You're like, what is that? Well, offset by commas is the definition. Or in this case here, offset by dashes is the definition. So they could be giving you the definition right in front of you, and unless you pay attention to it, you may not know. They could also use parentheses, so it's what I mentioned. Sometimes we are quick to ignore what's in parentheses. So if you didn't know what a raclette was, right here in parentheses. Similarly, brackets, they'll put definitions in brackets, or maybe they'll just explain what an unfamiliar word means. A platypus has a bill like a duck, webbed feet, fur, and a tail like a beaver. So pay attention to these kind of clues. These are definition clues because the author is literally giving you the definition. They're not making you dig for it. They're not making you look it up. It is right there in the sentence, but they are maybe encasing it inside of parentheses or commas or something along those lines. They might also just come right out and say it. They may also just use a word like means, is, known as, and instead of like a parentheses, they're literally using these little tiny words. I always like to say like is one of the most powerful words in our language because sometimes it follows like a clue. It gives a clue right afterwards. So for instance, doo-wop, if you're like, I don't know what doo-wop is, it says doo-wop is a style of jazz singing. Such a small, insignificant word, seemingly, but it's actually really powerful because it's telling you right away what the definition of that word is. Same with the word are. Lampreys are snake-like fish. They could have also said like doo-wop is defined as. Doo-wop is known as. When authors use those phrases or those words, those are transition words, and they're giving you the definition of an unfamiliar word. So be on the lookout for definition clues, whether it looks like a punctuation or it looks like a transition word or phrase, and it comes right out and gives you the definition. Sometimes common sense will kick in. An author will just use kind of like common sense in their sentence. They'll kind of just, the definition will just kind of flow but based on the way it's written. So for instance, the nefarious criminal killed without remorse. And if I was like, nefarious, I've never heard of that word before, but common sense tells me, okay, well, this is a criminal, so they already are up to no good, and they killed, and they feel bad about it. So nefarious is probably someone who's pretty, not a nice person, maybe evil or very unkind. So common sense helped me figure out the meaning of that word. This can also help whenever you have a word. I'm going to use a very basic example. The word run. If you look it up in the dictionary, it has probably 18 to 20 definitions. And if you saw a sentence that said, she was running for state office, hopefully you would know that they're not using the definition of run meaning a quick movement. She wasn't running, like moving quickly to the state. They're using the definition of run as in, a political campaign. So sometimes logic, common sense will kick in if they're using a word that's familiar, but they're using it in a different way. Another type of context clue is an example where authors will use, just like it says, like examples. So they might use words or phrases like such as, for example, like. So if you didn't know what an herbivore was, in commas, that's common again, we know there's something going on there, but they give an example, like the elephant or giraffe. Those are examples of herbivores. Will feed on plants or low-hanging trees. So that helps me know what an herbivore was. Even if I wasn't sure of it before, I'm like, oh, elephant, giraffe, they eat plants and trees. Okay, herbivore is obviously an animal that is more like vegetarian in nature. So that's how examples can help us. And finally, antonyms. So antonyms are the opposite of an unknown word. And these are usually the most tricky to pick up on. So you want to look for transition words like but, however, on the other hand, unlike. So here's an example. If I didn't know what the word craggy meant, it says unlike the smooth rocks found in many stream and riverbeds, the rocks along the northeastern coast can be very craggy. So it's telling me up here, unlike the smooth rocks, these rocks are craggy. So they're not like these ones. So the opposite of smooth, they're probably rough or ragged. And that helps me understand the opposite. I always like to use the example, if you wanted to be a doctor, but you don't like kids, you don't want to be a pediatrician, you prefer to be a gerontologist. Well, by giving you the opposite, I'm telling you, pediatrician, you don't want to do that because you don't like kids. You want to be a gerontologist. You're like, what does that word mean? Well, it has something to do with the medical field, but nothing to do with children. So gerontologist is a doctor for older people. So context with the antonym clue can kind of help you out there. Okay, so taking a break real quickly and just reviewing this part so far. Whenever you come across an unfamiliar word or phrase, your first go-to should be to see, did the author do the work for me already? Is there any need for me to actually look up these definitions? Or can I look to see, did the author provide a clue somewhere in this sentence or surrounding sentences? And maybe it's an example or a definition or an antonym. Okay. All right, so let's say that didn't help. The author didn't give a context clue, or they did, and you're still not sure. You can then start looking at word parts and word forms. And this might take you back to like elementary school. But if you're in the medical field, especially, this is really important. You have lots of word parts to work with. So when we say word parts, we mean prefix comes at the beginning of a word. Root is the base of a word. Suffix comes at the end of a word. So let's look at this word. And no one's around you, go ahead and try to pronounce it. Even if someone's around you, who cares? Go ahead and try to pronounce it. It's a real word. And if you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to say that. Well, what if we broke it into word parts? What if we looked at it and you're like, oh, okay, wait, mnemonic, ultra, microscopic, silico-volcano-conic-osis. All right, now it's in the word parts. I can actually say it. And you might even be like, oh, mnemonic, that looks like pneumonia, ultra microscopic, super tiny, volcano, like ash. And so this is actually a lung disorder caused by breathing in fine ash and dust. So it's a medical term. So this is, hopefully you're not going to have anything quite this large. I mean, some of you in the medical field might see some crazy large words, but the point is sometimes looking at word parts could be helpful. So again, whenever you have a word that you're unfamiliar with and maybe context isn't helping, look to see is there a prefix. Can you identify the beginning of a word? Because prefixes will change the meaning of a word. You know, if you had the word correct and you change it to incorrect, that changes the whole meaning. Common to uncommon, read to reread. Okay, so look to see, is there a prefix? Get to know your prefixes, especially according to your field. You know, if you're in a certain field and there's a lot of common prefixes that you see on a lot of words, learn those prefixes. And again, I keep bringing up medical, but it's so relevant to this particular conversation. If those of you who have to take medical terminology, or if you already have, you'll see that come up. Roots, every single word has a root or a base. Not every word has a prefix or a suffix, but every word has a root. And then a suffix comes at the end of the word. It usually just changes the function of a word. You know, lavine, lavabo, it changes that function. And then here are a couple more just examples about using word parts and how it can change the meaning. Regardless, let's say you use context clues or word parts, check your meaning. Whenever you're not sure if you came to the right conclusion about what the word means, plug it in. So for the example, it says, my son gave me a t-shirt with World's Greatest Dad emblazoned across the front. And if you were like, okay, that sounds like maybe written largely, well, plug that in. My son gave me a t-shirt with World's Greatest Dad written largely across the front. That makes sense. And if you can put it into the sentence and you're like, oh, that's good, then you are on the right track to having that right definition. The rest of the PowerPoint, I'm not going to go into detail with because it really refers back to some of these education. If we were in a physical class, I may use this as a point of discussion, but for lecture purposes, I'm going to stop there. Okay, now directly tied to what we just got done talking about in your Blackboard course, under assignments for this week, you'll see that there is a Chapter 2 practice sheet homework and Dropbox. So here it is, practice sheet homework. So you're going to download that. It's going to open up and look like this. This is something that I would typically, if we were face-to-face, pass out, and we would either do together, you would do on your own, we would check it with partners, whatever it might look like. But since we're online, you're going to do this on your own and submit it for homework. So the first part of it says circle or highlight, whatever you want. Some people like to, you know, insert, do a shape and like make a circle. Some people just prefer to, you know, highlight. I'm just randomly highlighting one. So, you know, whatever works for you. So you're going to read, it says, look for the best meaning for the underlined word as it is used in context. Each of these has some kind of context clues, whether it's an opposite clue, a definition clue, just common sense type logic clue. And your job is to figure out the meaning of the word. I'm going to really challenge you to not look up the definitions unless you absolutely have to. First, make sure that you read the sentence and see if the sentence itself can help you, because there's usually like an example or something that's going to help you figure out. You know, for instance, number 1, my brother said, I just freed myself from a very loquacious history professor. All he seemed to want was an audience. Okay, so if we're talking about a professor, he wants an audience. To me, it's kind of like a logic clue. It seems like he is talking about a very talkative person. Okay, so there's that first one. So that's what you're doing for this first exercise. It goes all the way through to number 10. Part 2 of this exercise, then it kind of puts a little bit more work on you because there's no choices. So it's the same idea, but it says write a synonym or like just an explanation or a definition on the line, and you can just write next to it if you need to, maybe if it'll let me. You can write next to it, type here, type your answer there, whatever you need to do, and then it's kind of lined up with that that underline. So you can just type your definition in. If you want to make it a different color so it stands out, you can. And of course, spell everything correctly there. All right, so that's what you're doing for that second part, is you are trying to come up with your own definition based on the context of the sentence for the underlined words. There's no multiple choice like there was at the top. So once you do that, make sure you save it. Make sure you remember where you save it. The Dropbox is right where you got the information from. So you'll go in, and this is due by Sunday, the end of the week 4. Browse, find where it is, and hit submit. Okay, so we've now talked about your week 4 discussion post and your chapter 2 practice sheet homework. Now we are going to pull up and talk about your text and skill practice. So if you want to pull that up, I have mine right here. Now this is something else that normally in a face-to-face we would do together. This is a chapter text and skill sheet. The purpose of this is to do the readings, discuss them, answer questions as they connect back to the chapter 2 content. And we do miss some of that discussion and some of that involvement with an online course. So a little bit more work does fall on your shoulders, since instead of, taking turns reading it or having me read it to you, you are reading this quite a bit on your own. So you'll see here is the text and skill practice. And I'm going to walk you through the pieces, and I'm even going to do a couple with you. So when you get into your textbook, what I would recommend doing, just to make it easiest, is just work your way down. It's mostly in page order anyway. You can see like it starts on page 30 and 42, and so it pretty much goes in order as it is. But some of you have asked, do I care if you print it off and write on it and then scan it back in? That's fine. Some people I know are printing it off, writing on it, and then typing their answers in and uploading it. Whatever is easiest for you. I have, you can hear it, I have hard copies right in front of me right now because that's how I prefer to work. So I print them off every time I get ready for a lesson to review and refresh my memory. And so whatever works best for you is fine. All right. So I have my text and skill sheet pulled up beside me here paper-wise. You can be clicking back and forth, or if you need it in front of you, whatever is best for you. We are going to look at part A of our text sheet. And again, normally in class, I would be doing this with you, but because of our online situation, I'm just going to kind of direct you where you're going to go. Part A says you're going to read Learning and Teaching a Two-Way Cal in Boston. So if you look at your table of contents over here, it's going to be reading number 1. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on it again so it takes me to the actual article. And there's some pre-reading questions, and these are things, again, I would usually kind of maybe ask 1 or 2 of these in class just to get warmed up. And then here's the actual article. So you are going to read this article, and how you do this is up to you. If you want to pause it right now while you're in kind of work mode, pause it and restart it. And whenever you're done, you're going to read this article, and you can see it's broken up a little bit by, I'm not sure what those, they used to have an image there. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but there we go. There's the definition there. You'll scroll, keep scrolling. And then here are other questions. Again, sometimes I would ask these, sometimes I would not. It just depends. For our purposes, you are doing the multiple choice questions. So you are answering questions 2, 3, 5, and 7, reading comprehension check. Again, I am getting that from your text and skill practice sheet. We're on Roman numeral 1A, 2, 3, 5, 7. I just happen to have it in front of me in the hard copy format, which is why I'm not really flipping back and forth right now. So I'm going to do the first 2 with you, and then you'll have to answer the last 2 on your own for this particular one. So let's say, hopefully, you have read this article. Question 2 says, the term two-way in the 3rd paragraph could be replaced with what? So if I scroll back up to the 3rd paragraph, now mine are cut off, but I can see over here on the right-hand side, number 3, it says here we have one of the Boston's poorest neighborhoods and named for a Puerto Rican poet who addressed the isolation of migration. Rafael Hernandez School was founded in the early 70s to serve the children of Boston's growing Puerto Rican immigrant community. After Boston's 74 desegregation order, Hernandez became a two-way language school. Okay, so two-way language school. I know they're not talking about a two-way road, right? So two-way, to me, language means that they are bilingual. There are two languages going on there. So in my text and skill sheet practice, here I would go ahead and just write a B, or type a B rather. And then if we look at number 3, in the 4th paragraph, it says, today the school is highly sought after. So if I wanted to scroll back up and read it in context, I could. And it says, today the school is highly sought after. A synonym for sought is, if something is highly sought after, that means that they really, they want it. It's desirable. So I would go back to my text and skill sheet here. And number 3 is desirable A. Now you on your own are going to answer questions 5 and 7. So 5 and 7 are both vocabulary. Remember, chapter 2 is about vocabulary. So they're both vocabulary related questions. Okay. All right. From there, we are going to look at part B of our text sheet. It's Roman numeral 1, part B of our text sheet. And I'm going to get in here. Hold on, give me a minute while I navigate. Here we go. Okay, took me a couple clicks, but here we go. We are going to be, it says pages, after we've done 37 to 40, which is basically what I talked about in my PowerPoint, we're going to answer these questions. So we're looking at passages 1, 2, and 3. So hold on. It's not where I want to be. I apologize. Still, I think it's safe to tell you that I'm not a fan of this textbook and the way it navigates. There we go. Here we go. Here we are. Passage 1. So if you would like to pause the video and read these 2 paragraphs, we're going to talk about 2 questions that go along with it. All right, hopefully you've paused and read. And we're going to look at questions 1 and 2 as they relate to this particular one. So it says the word disruptive in the first paragraph means. So if I look at the first paragraph, it says there is a significant number of violent or disruptive episodes. So if I'm thinking, okay, these are violent, that doesn't sound very peaceful. That probably means unruly. So if I'm back at my sheet here, I'm going to type in unruly. And then we're also answering question 2, dealing with the same passage. The word assess in the second paragraph, it says that because of the report of violence in their schools, making it difficult for the public to assess their safety. So if you're assessing something, you are evaluating it. You're looking to see how it's working or not working. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in D. All right, now on your own, you're going to read passage 2 and passage 3. So it's just going to be click down right here. Right here is passage 2. All you're answering right there is question number 2. Pay attention right here because it says opposite in meaning. So make sure that you are looking at that. It says the word derogatory in that second sentence of the second paragraph is opposite. So make sure that you don't jump, oh, I know what derogatory means. It's the opposite. And then you're also answering passage 3, question 3. The word accrue in the third paragraph means. Okay, so that's what you're doing for the rest of part B. All right, after that, you are going to be looking at part C. You are going to do the reading. Should we reward good grades? So I'm going to click back a few. And it's going to be, should we reward good grades with money and prizes? And you can see it's reading number 4 right here. So I'll click on that. Again, this is like one of my favorite ones, honestly, because it's really easy. I think to read, they interview different teachers. And so you'll read like the little different interviews. And I think it's really neat because we have someone from Alliance, Ohio in there who was interviewed. So you'll go through, you'll read those, and then you are answering questions from the comprehension check. So again, not the short answer, comprehension check. You are answering questions 2 and 4. So 2 and 4. And that is part C right here. Okay. Part Roman numeral 2A. After carefully reading today's students on page 61 through 64, answer these comprehension questions. So again, I'll navigate back. I'm going to scroll down. This is the reading number 5, textbook reading. So I'll click on that. So it takes me to it. Here's today's students. Make sure you read that particular article. It's an excerpt from a textbook. And then you're going to answer reading comprehension check questions 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10. Okay. 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10. Let's do the number 2 together. Each year, more than 1 million immigrants obtain legal permanent resident status in the United States. In the above sentence, the word obtain means if they obtain legal permanent resident status, they are acquiring. They're getting that status. So that's what I would write right here. That was A. Okay, and then you'll fill out the rest. All right, the last thing on your text and skill practice sheet, these are probably my favorite part of our textbook, to be honest, because I really enjoy most of these speakers. It's a TED Talk. I don't know how many of you are familiar with TED Talks, but they are great educational tools. TED Talk is really, it was popular, I think, a few years ago. I'm not sure how they're doing these now with COVID. They're probably more virtual than anything, but they cover a whole range of issues. And so the TED Talk for this one, you'll scroll down, it's reading number 6. And of course, it's on education, since the whole chapter is on education. It says, "Are failing schools enough is enough?" What's awesome about these is you could go to Google, type in the title of the TED Talk, "Are failing schools enough is enough?" and you can watch and listen to the TED Talk. So here he is. This is the TED Talk right here. It's 16 minutes. Now, like the last 2 or 3 minutes, is like a quick interview recap with the speaker. But you could always, here's the actual transcript. Right here. Here's the whole thing. So you could follow along. You could just listen and read it. You can just read it. It's really up to you how you get through the TED Talk. I personally like Geoffrey Canada. I enjoy listening to him. I enjoy reading what he's done. So I always opt, when I teach this face-to-face, we actually listen to this TED Talk instead of read it. Regardless, however you take in that TED Talk, you are going to answer 2 of these short answer questions right below it. You are going to answer questions 1 and 2. 1 and 2 are what you are going to pay attention to for the purposes of the TED Talk. And again, that is right here at the bottom. And if you need to delete the lines to write, that's okay. If you want to write on the lines, if you're putting it out in writing, whatever, again, works for you. So, okay, as a recap, we did a few together on, a couple of the sections, and then you're finishing the rest that we did not do on your own. Make sure you save that somewhere, that you know how to access it again, because when you get back into Blackboard, there's the Dropbox. That is also due Sunday the 14th. Okay. All right, so quick recap before I end this video, and then I'll have the vocabulary video separately. This week, week 4, we're in chapter 2. It runs from February 8th through the 14th. Your materials, you'll need the PowerPoint, the vocabulary study guide you will need in the next video. You are turning in this week. Your discussion, I'm going to work backwards. Your discussion board is due Wednesday the 10th for week 4 attendance. It's based on a question in your text. You are completing the Chapter 2 homework sheet by Sunday the 14th, the Chapter 2 text and skill practice sheet by Sunday the 14th, and your Chapter 2 vocabulary quiz is due Sunday the 14th. I will go over your words in a separate video so that you can just kind of use that video to access and look over those words. I also wanted to, before I wrap up this video, let you know that by the time you watch this video, your first mastery skills will be open. So you'll click into mastery skills and you will see there's your very first video for the very first skill, determining meaning from context. That's what chapter 2 is all about. That's why this one will be open. So you can watch this video, even have it pulled up on a different device if you need to. And I help you walk through most of the questions. So you can watch the video. It's fairly quick compared to especially my lecture videos, but there's the first skill video and there's the actual skill itself inside the post-test 1 and 2. Remember, you're aiming for an 80% overall on all 10 skills. So that's in a separate video as well, so it's easily accessible. Okay, I will talk to you all in the chapter 2 vocabulary video. Have a great week. Bye.